Hello, everyone. It's so nice to have you here with us. I'm Molly O'Connell, she, her, MAMP's Assistant Director, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the presentation and discussion about Maine's fiscal sponsorship landscape. I'm just going to offer a few logistics before we dive into the content today. We'll be spending the first half of the session hearing some highlights from recent research, and then the second half of the hour will include lots of opportunity for Q&A. So please do be thinking about your questions and observations that you want to share. You can share them at any point in chat. We'll ask you to stay on mute unless you're called on to ask a question later, but we really encourage you throughout the session to use the chat box to share questions or comments or insights from your own experience. It's up to you if you'd like to remain on video or be off video. And if it would be helpful to you, you can turn on closed captions using the CC icon on your Zoom toolbar. Those are computer generated, so aren't perfect, but hope they will be a useful tool. And as I mentioned, we're recording today's session and barring any technical difficulties, the recording will be shared in follow-up email before the end of the week. So for those of you who are not as familiar with MAMP, I'll just briefly share that we're a statewide organization serving the charitable nonprofit sector broadly. And our work is made possible because of the investment of our 1,300 and growing nonprofit, foundation, and business members in all 16 counties of the state. And we organize our work around three priorities: building the capacity of individual organizations through educational programs and tools and services, weaving connections among our network members to lift up effective, innovative practices and foster collaboration, and cultivating productive cross-sector relationships so that we can collectively advance solutions to pressing issues and opportunities facing Maine. And while the pressures to find operational efficiencies are not new by any means, they're feeling particularly urgent for many nonprofit organizations in this moment. And we see great opportunity, actually, to build our sector's collaborative capacity in ways that will serve our missions far beyond this moment. Fiscal sponsorship, the topic of today's hour, is a model that can, when effectively implemented, leverage separate strengths towards common purpose. And the research that we'll be discussing today provides a really much needed baseline understanding of what's happening in Maine now and how to build on it. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Diana Morris, Executive Director of Onion Foundation, who will share some further background on this initiative, this research initiative, and introduce our speakers today. Thank you so much, Diana.
Well, thank you, Molly. I'm really happy that we're having this session today. I want to just welcome all of you too and say I'm so pleased to see you all here today. I joined the Onion Foundation about 3 years ago, and one of the things I noticed is that there were many small nonprofit organizations and also very few fiscal sponsors. And on one hand, that's something that one could see in many states. Almost every state has not enough fiscal sponsors. But in this situation with so many smaller entities, it's really can create some real challenges. And so one of the things I thought would be useful is to have a landscape analysis to really understand who are the fiscal sponsors, what's the experience of them, what's the experience of those who are being fiscally sponsored. And one of the things that we wanted to do was to therefore create this landscape analysis. I was so happy that other foundations joined in with the Onion Foundation to support this study. That included the Maine Community Foundation, Broad Reach Fund, Sewall Foundation, Health, the Quimby Family Foundation. And we were able to find Carol Kelly and Joanne Joy from Pivot Point to actually do the study. One of the things they found, and you'll hear more about this, is that of course we do have fiscal sponsors, and these fiscal sponsors can be useful not only to small groups that may or may not have their 501c3s, but even larger groups that just would prefer not to have to handle some of the back office responsibilities. And so there's a lot of reasons and a lot of ways why, to have more fiscal sponsors in the state would be useful. I want to just clarify that all the funders, all the foundations that are supporting this study, and frankly, many more foundations are really interested in supporting fiscal sponsorships and are completely willing to make grants directly to fiscal sponsors that submit proposals. There are some areas where there's some clarification that's needed, and I know that that is one area. One thing that's been amazing is that this study actually was able to survey, thanks to Carol and Joanne, 200 representatives of different organizations. So throughout the state, all different sectors, large and small. I just think that that's just a great accomplishment, because that means that this landscape analysis is fairly representative of what's going on in the state. These researchers also did 20 direct interviews, so they got even more in-depth understanding of what is going on. And you'll see in the report, and I really hope that you will take the time to read it if you haven't already, that what the researchers have done is that they have laid out some short-term, medium-term, and long-term recommendations. And that's something for us all to discuss, for the funders to discuss, for nonprofits to discuss, groups that use fiscal sponsors to discuss. You may agree or disagree with some of the recommendations, but by laying them out, it gives us sort of a basis for discussion. You know, what should come first, what should come second. These are all things that I can tell you funders are interested in hearing what you think about them. I know that the funders are going to come together again, even more, I hope, than the original 6. And we will try to act on some of those recommendations. One of the easy things to do is just to clarify that we do want to support fiscal sponsorships. Another thing is to be really clear and be in agreement. What are the key components of a fiscal sponsorship agreement, so that you don't have to tailor something from funder to funder. You may want to have a more elaborate agreement because you want to have more services. But in terms of the essential components, one thing that funders can do, and we plan to do, is to come together and just make really clear what we think those components are, just to make less work for those groups that want to have fiscal sponsorships. So I will end there. I know that we're all really eager to not only hear again from Carol and Joanne, but also to hear what your questions and suggestions are. That's going to be really important for us to move forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Carol. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Diana. Really appreciate it. And just so grateful to be here, and to Molly and the team for giving us this space, but also just really honored to be given the opportunity to work with these funders who are so committed to improving fiscal sponsorship in Maine, and work with Joanne. So this has been a really fun project, and I'm looking forward to getting everyone's thoughts and hearing what you think about it. So what we're going to do today, Joanne and I have a little slide deck that we're going to throw up here and start in. And I think Joanne's going to kick it off, but we really hope that you will. We will try not to overdwell in areas. We'll give you the highlights, hoping you've had a chance to look at the material. Hopefully you've also all noticed that even though the report is beefy on first glance, there's really just 20 pages of reporting, and then there's actually a really large appendix that are the full survey results. So I hope that wasn't too daunting, and maybe didn't lead to any drop off in enthusiasm. So we will start by just giving you a little bit of an overview of how we got started on this and what we were hoping to achieve. So Joanne, I'm going to start screen sharing, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Carol. So to introduce myself, I'm Joanne Joy, and I have helped start a number of nonprofits here in Maine. I have been the executive director of 2 different nonprofits over my time, and I continue to occasionally mentor new nonprofits, trying to get over some of the confusion that can easily settle in when you're trying to both find grants, apply for them, and to start out as a nonprofit. So thank you very much for joining us. Our first slide after this is a little bit about the background, and Diana and Carol and I have explained the same thing a couple of times. Some of it is really important. I think the Maine-based philanthropies, I think, really do need our appreciation for supporting this. I also want you to know that Carol and I did some extensive research before we put together the surveys and the interviews. And some of the resources we used in that research is on page 23. So we're going to mention page numbers throughout our presentation for places you might want to land to get kind of a summary of this report. So if you happen to have the report, you might want to flip to those pages while we're talking to get a little bit more information, or you may just want to jot down page numbers as we go through so you can look back and see to get more information. So this presentation format, again, access to the report is helpful. We will refer to the page numbers, and we did our best to do call out boxes, tables, and charts to call your attention to some of the important parts of our findings and our process. The appendices, I think, are also, even though long, very important for anybody to understand how we came to the conclusions that we came to, and for ways for you all to look and see what your peers across the state of Maine were saying. So on page 23, we have resources, which is very helpful because some of those are reports that we used in our research. So what were they doing across the country looking at fiscal sponsorship, and what were some of their questions and concerns? Very early in the report, on page 5, you'll see this quick snapshot. Go ahead to the next one, Carol. You'll see this snapshot of the recommendations. So I don't imagine you can actually read these recommendations, but I do think it's important that you know, as early as page 5, you can see the summary of that work. Go ahead, Carol. We also have, the purpose and scope. So I'm going to actually read this here out loud just to make sure we're on the same page. We explored the needs and challenges experienced by past, current, and potential fiscal sponsors and sponsees. So sponsees is our general term for any organization that's using another nonprofit to help them out in either back office kind of work, or to be the nonprofit to have the nonprofit status that the new group might not have. So we did look at, what opportunities there might be as well. And the findings and recommendations are intended to serve like several years. We put it down, I believe, as 3 to 5 years. And of course, it's up to the nonprofits and those who are funded and the sponsees to also do their part in moving things along. The funders can kickstart, jumpstart a number of things, but the participation of the sponsees is also very important. Next one. So for me, I feel particularly proud of our methodology. So we worked hand in hand with the funders to really put together the survey questions, as well as what our research suggested we ask. And so the 19 question survey is what makes up the majority of the appendix in the back of this report. That report actually had 263 responses. We did the 20 one-on-one interviews. It was very important to us as well that the interviews were of long-term nonprofits, folks just starting out. We had budgets going from $10,000 up to, several $100,000. So we feel that we really touched base. We were in 7 of the 8 public health districts. So I think that you can assume that somebody similar to you was interviewed or surveyed. We also had MAMF kindly put in one single question in their annual survey for us. You can see this question as well. It added kind of texture and background to the recommendations that we made, and we had an additional 336 responses. So the original 19 question survey was sent by the 6 funders that funded the project, which meant largely they were folks who had already been funded by those philanthropies. The MAMF single question went to any nonprofit that happened to be a member of the Maine Association of Nonprofits. And then, of course, we had funder input, both verbally, and we did one survey toward the end of this project to get their feedback on what they were doing already and if there was something we were missing. Go ahead, Carol. I'm going to turn the data analysis back over to you, Carol, and let you from there add some of your comments.
Thank you so much, Joanne. So I think I'll put a fine point on just another moment of appreciation for all of you and Molly and the MAMP team, because this really got, when Joanne and I originally hatched this scheme and ran it by Diana, we said, well, we think we can get 50 or 60 people to take this survey. And to have the huge number response, that tells you something right there about the level of importance, but also just so much appreciation for the community-minded approach to if we all weigh in, we can be part of finding solutions. So so thank you again for that to everyone. The analysis section starts on page 9, as this slide references, and there is a lot of good stuff in here. And so we tried to break it into 5 sections that would really tell the story from start to finish in terms of what the data really indicated to us. So first we asked a few questions about familiarity and interest in fiscal sponsorship in both being a sponsor and or being a sponsee. And so I think you'll see in there, and I'll get into a little bit more detail in each one, but you'll see some sort of overarching content around just setting the stage. But we wanted to dig into what folks were experiencing for, things that were challenging, things that were needed, or gaps, missed opportunities in particular, where there's just these baked in mismatches. And then exploring, well, how could we make this easier? How could it be easier to be a sponsor? How could it be easier to be a sponsee? And how could we do better at matching the services offered and the supports needed, which I think you'll see if you haven't already read the content about, again, that sort of mismatch of what's needed and what's offered based on what's easy and possible for most sponsors to provide in the current landscape. Fiscal sponsorship outlook, in other words, a looking forward component. So digging into this a bit more, starting with familiarity and interest, which is on page 9, you'll find a table there, and there's a little bit of narrative as well, but you'll find a table there that really just sets the stage for familiarity. Most folks who answered the survey are part of a nonprofit organization, but we didn't want to limit it to people or entities or organizations that are officially a 501c3 or any other version of nonprofit. So 90% or so said my organization is a nonprofit, and 4 out of 5 or 80% of folks who answered said they were familiar or extremely familiar or somewhat familiar with the practice of fiscal sponsorship. So a fairly high level of familiarity, not as high level of experience. About 1 in 3 organizations or individuals who responded said that their organization had served as a fiscal sponsor in the past 3 years, and even fewer, about 1/4, slightly less than 1/4, said that they had been in the role of sponsee in the last 3 years. So a lot of familiarity, maybe not quite as much experience, but still not insignificant levels of experience in either being a sponsor or being a sponsee. And then looking at this next one, is there interest in the future? I think you can see the difference, right? You've got 1/3 of folks saying, I've been a sponsor, but 2/3 saying I'd be willing to be a sponsor. Similarly, 1/4 saying I've been a sponsee, but gee, if I could make it happen, half, so basically doubling in each case, would be interested in being a sponsee. So I think that indicated to us a great, tremendous level of opportunity. So needs and challenges, missed opportunities. So there's no question that opportunities are being missed. It obviously 60%, 59% of folks who are interested in serving as a fiscal sponsor said that they had actually set aside an opportunity to do so because they didn't pursue it because they didn't have what they perceived to be the necessary training, capacity, or resources. So so that's a key piece. If more folks would be willing to do it, if they had more training, capacity, and resources, great. That feeds directly into some of our recommendations. And similarly, the folks who said they'd be interested in becoming a fiscal sponsee, they more than 1/4 said they had chosen not to do so in the past because of similar limitations in being finding what they need out there in the landscape. So that's a key piece of the puzzle. What would make it easier? Well, you can see that in the document, but also hopefully this is large enough that you can see some of the smaller text here. But there's several really high performing responses to what would make it easier. There's the obvious, like we want projects that align with our mission. We would need additional funding in order to pay for the actual costs of sponsorship. We also could use templates, legal and financial best practice templates would be extremely helpful. And then when you get into that sort of moderate response, the 60% down to 40-ish% level, additional operational personnel that could be assigned to the project, maybe more alignment geographically, and potentially more training in some of the operational components and alignment with our values. But you can see those top three: alignment with mission, additional funding or resources to pay for the actual costs, and then some of those legal, financial best practices and templates. So that's what's going to make it easier for sponsors. And this shows up on page 10. Easier for sponsees, interestingly, again, the alignment, no surprise there. That would make it much easier to be the sponsee if you have a sponsor that is aligned. But similarly now, training to learn how to use a fiscal sponsor, how to be a sponsee. There's some interesting stuff in here around funding and the use of the grant dollars, but additional funding so that the sponsor fees do not take away from the perceived to take away from program fees. We get into that a little more, and this was an area Joanne and I really dug into in our interviews, which is what are the perceptions of the financial barriers and the financial improvements that can be made. So we've had some really great conversations, and maybe Diana can speak to this too in terms of what funders, there's perceptions of limits, and then there's actual limits, and they are not the same thing. So no surprise there. So getting folks to understand, wow, there's miscommunication here somewhere, and then obviously more of those values alignments. So we see some themes here in terms of financial themes, in terms of templates, and education components. So matching services offered and needed. I found this to be so interesting, that of the three things that sponsees said were most likely to be offered, and this is again on page 12 and 13, so there's more narrative that makes the bridge between these sections that we're talking about. But of the three options that were most likely to be stated as needed by sponsees, sorry, I think I just missaid that. Most likely to be needed by sponsees were, none of them were selected as likely to be offered by more than 40% of the sponsors. So you've got three things that are needed, but less than half of sponsors really offer them as likely to be offered. And similarly, none of the three options that are likely to be offered by the sponsors were selected as likely to be needed by more than 1/3 of the sponsees. So you've got this really base level mismatch in what's needed and what's offered. And so again, it just indicates another, it's a huge opportunity to try to bring these pieces together. And hopefully what we've done is provide some recommendations that could really create a roadmap for investments and strategies that will strengthen the overall ecosystem. So we did also ask about the future. How important and essential is the fiscal sponsorship function in our nonprofit ecosystem. No surprise, 69% of folks said extremely high, somewhat or extremely important. And how likely is it that there are enough organizations that are willing and able to serve as fiscal sponsors? Probably no surprise based on everything we've heard, but only 28 or 29% actually said that there are enough, somewhat or extremely likely that there are enough. How often does a lack of administration or operations capacity prevent projects from moving forward? 72% of folks said that they believe that that happens either somewhat often or extremely often, which is both sad and also obviously a huge opportunity. And then we've got, how helpful would it be to have a hub of fiscal sponsorship in Maine? And I'm trying to actually move my move my screen so I can actually see the percentage. Joanne, jump in here. What's the percentage say?
82.3.
82. There it is. All right. Thank you. This is the limitations of the screen sharing function. So what would it, 82% of folks said that they thought it would be important that a hub was created, which could provide that education component, that could do the matchmaking, as we called it, of sponsors and sponsees, and then maybe even potentially serving as a fiscal sponsor for those who need it. So 82% said either somewhat or extremely helpful, which is a good, just one arrow pointing us in a direction, an important direction. We did do, subsequent to the survey, as Joanne said, we did do 20 in-depth interviews. And there were some really important themes that came away from that, including the need for more transparency between the sponsors and sponsees. It's not always obvious what the money, how the money is getting designated, what services are being offered or are part of the agreement, and what ones would be considered sort of an add-on. So that more understanding and transparency between parties, as well as with the funders themselves, would be extremely important. The impact of the fees for the sponsors. The sponsors, oftentimes, as you undoubtedly may have read, but the sponsors often are saying yes to being a sponsor because of a relationship. And so I might say, hey, Joanne has, a nonprofit. I'm gonna call up my friend Joanne and see if she'll sponsor me or my organization to do a certain project, or perform a certain function. Joanne's organization and mine may not have anything really to do with each other or much alignment at all, but yet because, Maine is Maine, we're probably going to think of that first as one of our ways of solving our problem, right? Let's go to the person that we know. And so wouldn't it be great if there was a hub, a place where we could actually make those matches, find those folks, meet the right people, and get a really a sensible, organizationally sensible alignment between sponsor and sponsee, but also more clarity around how the fees are used. And so sometimes there was actually tension between the sponsors and sponsees because of that perception, as I mentioned, about fees potentially being used, either too much being charged based on what was being received, or maybe that there was even a sense that part of their grant was being taken away or lost because it was going to sponsorship fees. And so could there be more done to make that more clear? Roles and responsibilities, obviously, no surprise there. And then the continued clarification or identification of trainings that would be really, really helpful, but also sometimes really difficult to participate in just because of natural time limitations. Everyone is doing a lot with not a lot of time and not a lot of money for the most part. And so just adding more things, it just makes it hard to say yes to being a fiscal sponsor for sure. So those are some of the themes that just popped. Here's the summary of findings. You'll find this deeper into the document, but it's also on that page 5 of the summary sheet. So we have 8 basic findings. We've got a shortage of high quality capacity because of all the reasons we just said. But that was really crystal clear. There's not enough folks or organizations that can take on fiscal sponsees. That can take on the role of sponsor. The financial concerns are a barrier to expanding that capacity, to expanding fiscal sponsorship. Organizations, either ones that already do it, taking on more sponsees, or adding organizations who are willing to be sponsors. There's limited resources and supports specifically for sponsors and sponsees. That personal relationships really drive those arrangements, which sometimes doesn't actually lead to the most efficient arrangements or connections. There's tremendous variation, as Diana said earlier, in the expectations and agreements. And so just even having some core agreements among funders about what those agreements should look like could be very, very helpful. There are really the standards of practice legally and financially, they're not consistently adopted or required. Again, there's so much variation in the agreement. And so much of it is done sort of by my observation anyway, Joanne, and my observation is that a lot of the arrangements are made sort of instinctively, as opposed to, okay, here's a template and we're going to follow that. So we want to just make sure all those are much more available. Funders may have policies and practices that are inadvertent barriers. They also may not, but they are perceived that way. And so the funders themselves are just extremely interested. And we know this from the subsequent funder survey and our discussions with them. They are keenly interested in making improvements and taking beneficial actions that will make the system work better for everyone. And then also, this is a slightly broader statement, but nonprofits in general are struggling to sustain their day-to-day operations. I hear this in every group I'm part of. And so this is very challenging. It also increases the demand for fiscal sponsorship, because fiscal sponsorship is a way to get some of those day-to-day operational functions accomplished, but it reduces the supply of sponsorship services for the exact same reason. So this is, again, leading to that mismatch, right? Sponsors don't have more to offer. Sponsees need what the sponsors can't provide. So building capacity is going to be the kickoff to our recommendations. Joanne, I'll turn to you for wave one of the recommendations.
Okay, thank you. So this is the same block of information that I showed you quickly, but there's also a lot more detail starting on page 18. So if you're interested in more detail of these recommendations, please go to page 18 and beyond. So increased compensation for organizations performing fiscal sponsorship functions is a #1 recommendation for us. Our findings in the interviews were that some organizations were charging nothing, some were charging 2%, 5%, but no one felt that what they were charging for being a fiscal sponsor actually covered the services they were providing. We also recommend in this first year to reduce non-financial barriers and inequities in fiscal sponsorship arrangements. Some that we heard about originally may actually be myths, and people who are writing grants may have known something 5 years ago that has subsequently changed. For instance, how much an organization can apply for. Is there a limit to fiscal sponsorship fees, etc.? And then, of course, boost sponsorship capacity among a small cohort of nonprofits. So are there several nonprofits that could really increase their ability to do sponsorship as kind of a pilot project, which is very interesting to then be able to implement a lot of other strategies. Okay, so next one. Then build the resource hub in a year or two. I did see already in the chat that one person had a one-liner, yay to the resource hub, which would actually help support the growing network of sponsors and sponsees. It would have core expectations and agreements that could be adopted and also expanded if need be. There would be consistent legal and financial standards. Now, both of these, 5 and 6, were repeatedly talked about from both the sponsee and the sponsor perspectives, that there was a great deal of confusion by both and a great deal of variance. And then, of course, the data-driven matchmaking platform within the resource hub to help with the alignment and fit is what we feel absolutely imperative. And then phase 3, integrate and scale up. Carol, would you like to speak to this?
Sure. Thanks, Joanne. So I think just also flagging, hopefully you all can either follow along in the report. We're going relatively quickly here, to say the least, actually. So just acknowledging that. But we're now onto let's see, later pages. I've now covered up the page numbers, but it's roughly page 21. We're expanding in the first number 8 of this phase 3, integrating and scaling. The idea is taking this resource hub, which is being the entire focus of phase 2 is building out this resource hub and all the functions that could be baked into that hub. But what would it look like if we said, all right, let's take that resource hub and let's turn it into a sort of one-stop shop model that integrates the capacity for fiscal sponsorship. So taking on, making the matches, but then perhaps the entity itself takes on the sponsorship role when it's necessary, if there's not another option that works better. Sponsorship capacity, technical assistance, and operational services. So now you've basically say, let's scale up those operational services. Let's offer them maybe across organizations in broader ways, and pair that into an umbrella fiscal sponsorship or resource hub. So it's really building out the hub model with some of these other components. And that operational services model, where we say, look, not everybody should have to hire their own, communications expert as part of your organizational structure, or not everyone should have an in-house bookkeeper, or whatever those back office operational pieces are. Could that actually then be integrated or scaled even further to be available to all nonprofits? So it does seem like there's the chance to both bundle and then expand and scale. And so it's really important that that we at least attempt to look at those options. The third one, those are 8 and 9, and then the third one is just we want to be always engaging stakeholders. And so this could have been number 1, it could have been number 6, it should be everywhere, which is we always want to be engaging stakeholders to evaluate, assess, improve, all the things that would allow us to make sure we're doing a good job now, and we're looking at community level feedback, and then we're growing and strengthening the ecosystem overall so that it works for everyone. So number 10 is a bit of an overarch, but it's also foundational. So it's a wraparound, let's call it that. So those are the three, the third phase. And then in this final this is a slightly different way of saying that, but we want to make sure that no matter what we're doing, everyone has a role to play in this, and we want to evolve and transform as we need, and as circumstances create the circumstances that allow that to happen. So we're going to need active engagement and collaboration every step of the way, and this is a piece of that puzzle. Concluding this, we really hope that the findings and recommendations that this report outlines create a foundational touchstone for understanding the environment as it currently is, but also providing that blueprint for shared investments and strategies going forward that can make things work better for everyone. So we hope that this is going to create more stability, more sustainability. Our nonprofit ecosystem in Maine is so essential to our lives and our communities. And it also helps funders maximize the value, the equity, the impact of their grant making. With that, I will pause, and maybe I'll even stop screen sharing. And Molly, I don't know, maybe turn it over to you to kick off the discussion component.
Sure thing. Thank you so much. Yes, I think maybe turn off screen share for now, although we can always turn it back on if there's information people want a chance to see again. And just a reminder that we will share out the recording and links that have been shared in the follow-up email too. So if you just need more time to read and digest some of what's been shared and in the report, that this is certainly not the end of a conversation. This session today is the start of a conversation or part of an ongoing conversation about this. As everyone has emphasized so far, everybody's reactions and insights and ideas and questions are incredibly important to the process of exploring, what could we build together to advance the collaborative capacity here in Maine for our sector. So if folks have questions, you are absolutely welcome to raise your hand or even just come off mute to share them directly. You can also share them in chat if you'd prefer, either to the room generally, or you can share them directly to me if it's something you want to ask anonymously. And we will just kind of open it up for a group conversation.
Molly, do you mind if I jump in and ask a specific question?
Please do.
Yeah, I would, as you think about any questions you might have, but also if you'd be willing to share comments, I think Joanne and I would love to know was there anything in here that surprised you? Did a piece of this either pop as like, wow, that's an angle that might explain a lot, but we hadn't really thought of, or gee, I'm surprised to not see. So I'd love to just know if folks found this either inspiring or surprising in any particular way.
One thing, Carol, that I don't know that this was surprising, but one thing that I really appreciated about the report and in the recommendations was that you really elevated that the limitations on just existing financial management capacity in the sector overall and operational capacity is such a key part of this, that it's not necessarily limited to the concept of fiscal sponsorship, but that it has implications for growing capacity around fiscal sponsorship. And so I thought that that was really helpful to elevate in this report, the sort of intersection between general financial management capacity and how tight, tight margins that our organizations are working on, even if they might like to be able to offer some shared capacity to an emerging organization or a grassroots organization.
Yeah, thanks for that, Molly. I was really struck as we talked to folks, particularly in the interviews, about that intersection of that issue, right? That it touches the demand side and the supply side in an unhelpful way. So folks struggling to get help on that end need more help, and yet the folks who are most likely to be able to help them are unable or less able to help, right?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah. Melissa, I saw you had a comment, and then Diana, we can turn to you.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I didn't put my hand up yet, but thank you. I do. I am just it's more of a comment than a question or a being surprised, because I did join late, but I'm finding it really interesting that there are increasing opportunities for these types of hubs in a lot of different contexts. So this one in fiscal sponsorship contexts, we're also exploring one as it relates to education and educational services contexts and legal services contexts. And so it's just interesting that we're all kind of coming together and saying we have to do some of this work more efficiently, and by doing it together, we can do so. I think that has to be a good sign.
Thank you for that, Melissa. That's really helpful. I'm seeing the same thing, and it's nice to know that others are seeing the theme emerge.
Diana,
I see your hand up too.
Well, maybe two things. One is I just wanted to elaborate a little bit on your, I guess, your recommendation number 3, which is, boosting sponsorship among a small cohort of nonprofits. And my understanding is the idea there is right now, as you said, some fiscal sponsors are doing it sort of as a favor. Maybe they do 1, maybe they do 2. But the idea would be that maybe foundations could give funding to a small group of nonprofits that actually are interested in doing this at scale. And part of that process would be actually developing a business plan. What would it take in order to be a fiscal sponsor for many more nonprofits? Would you need to hire another person? What kind of services would you offer? Would they be, you could have a range of services and actually charge more or less, depending upon how many services the sponsee wanted to have. And so that's something that I know a number of foundations are actually becoming interested in. And of course, what we'd want to know is if there's certain nonprofits that have done some fiscal sponsorship, but with their board's approval would be interested in actually developing a business plan so that they could actually do this at an entirely different scale. So that's one thing. The other thing I just wanted to comment on, this concern about fiscal sponsorship fees taking away from program. One of the things, I would just note is, of course, if you do your own back office services, that costs real money. In some instances where an organization is really small, they sort of do it on a volunteer basis. But I guess the question is that sustainable for how many years? If the organization gets bigger, is it still sustainable? If people simply burn out, is it sustainable? So some of those back office things that people may be doing on a volunteer basis actually do cost money. They're real things, they're real activities, they do take time. And so, in a healthy way, one would hope to see a budget from a nonprofit that actually shows the cost of doing those back office things. And then if you happen to decide, well, I'm not going to actually do it in our own nonprofit, we're going to engage a fiscal sponsor and they're going to have a fee. At that point, it's not really taking away from your program. It's just a necessary expense. So that's a certain way that I know a lot of us funders think about this. And I just wanted to put that on the table. But, we also would be very interested to know about this idea of a few nonprofits actually saying, okay, I want to do that planning exercise. I want to develop a business plan. And if I need to expand in some way, if foundations will help me do that, we are willing to try to do this at some scale.
Thank you, Diana. I was hoping you'd jump in on the discussion about the perceptions. I will just toss out too. Oh, I see Aaron's hand, but let me just also say that I think Rick put in the chat how much demand there is for fiscal sponsorship, or a surprise for demand. I do think that what Diana was just talking about, in some ways, there's no real way to know, is it the chicken or the egg, right? But what's driving the demand for fiscal sponsorship could be less about the need for a 501c3 and more about the need for an accountant, right? And so peeling that all apart as we go, there may be more inventory work done, or that could be really helpful in figuring out. Maybe the matchmaking is partly around functions. I'm tossing out, more than is really covered in the report, but it's an important piece. Aaron, I see your hand.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is so fascinating to me. I've been involved in a number of collaborative efforts around Maine that are shorter term, and so a fiscal sponsor is a perfect match to kind of get that work done. And I've also worked on the back end doing bookkeeping and other things. So I've always been like, you can't undervalue how much effort and time it takes to, provide that fiscal sponsor role. But now being on the other side, I have one of the places where I've encountered that kind of conflict about the fees is, when there are funding sources where, the most you can apply for is $10,000, right? So you're looking at, can I take all that 10,000 for this to go to this project, or do I have to take off 1,000, for the fiscal sponsor fee? And that's certainly what we've been doing. But I think that is one of the places where it comes up, because it's going grant by grant as opposed to sort of having some other funding source to cover that cost.
Aaron, thanks for bringing that up. And Diana, I don't want to put you on the spot, but the funders talked about this the last time we got together with them. I think this is an area where there's a perception, but also maybe the way it's written, like way grants come out where you say, oh, there's a $10,000 cap. The funders, I'm hearing the funders say, oh, we didn't mean that it had to be. But Diana, what's your take on how funders are generally responding to this sort of, it does appear to be a fairly pervasive perception, if not reality.
Well, a couple of things. I mean, I would start out by saying that funders always need to be educated, and we really depend on you all to sort of educate us and really say, look, this is how this is working, or this is what's possible. And this, if there's something that seems to be a real restriction, I think I would just really point it out. I think that's really helpful. What I can tell you in the case of Onion, and I think we're pretty similar, I mean, we usually have different ranges that are available to organizations. And if they use a fiscal sponsor, it is true that it becomes part of that range. But we depend on you all to tell us what the percent is. We don't have any kind of preconceptions that a fee can only be this amount, 7%, 5%, 8%, 10%. It really depends a lot on what services you're asking for. Ideally, the fiscal sponsor would really price out what it's costing them. And then this is part of this education process that I think is not just for nonprofits, it's really for funders too, to understand, this it's just like some funders who don't allow for indirect costs. I mean, these indirect costs, I strongly believe, are things that should be included if you're willing as a funder to support a project. And so, that again, more and more funders, I think, are thinking that way, but, it's not 100%. So I think that's really important. There may be some funders at some point who, if they had a 10% ceiling, would say, okay, in a fiscal sponsorship relationship, we'll do a fiscal sponsor fee on top of that. I can't really speak for all funders. I know that at least in our case, probably it would be incorporated in whatever that ceiling is. But I also know that in our case, when we look at a budget, we really want to see the indirect costs and have our money go toward them as well, because we think it's really important. We don't want people to burn out. We do want organizations to be sustainable. And, you all decide how big you want to get. And what's appropriate for you given whom you're serving, what you're doing, and so on. But those back office costs are really important to the health of your organization. They allow you to last for the long term. So whether we're funding you without a fiscal sponsor or with a fiscal sponsor, we think that there is a cost there, and we would like our funding to help contribute to supporting those costs. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's at least the approach that I know we have, and I think many of my colleagues have.
Thanks, Diana. Joanne, do you want to tackle Carol's question in the chat? I think that's a really good one.
I do want to.
I thought you might.
So there is a question in the chat. Was there any discussion regarding concern for conflict between sponsor and sponsee regarding fundraising? So yes, indeed, there were concerns, and rarely was it for the sponsee was the door wide open, that the sponsor did have some criteria, either because they did not have really good fundraising software to keep the money separate or to document it in a very good way. They did not want, as a sponsor, to have fundraising, individual donations, small funds commingled at all, or even addressed by a fiscal sponsor. And many were concerned, both from the sponsor role and the sponsee role, that there was a conflict. From the sponsee role, it was, do the funders prioritize the larger organization for grants if we're both applying? And there seemed to be an understanding by some that you could not apply to some funders as a sponsee if the sponsor was also applying. These are muddy waters and would be something that a template, a good agreement between two organizations would definitely need to clearly identify. So yes, it was a big concern and a frequent topic.
What I would just add to that is most foundations, I think, in Maine are willing to have an application that's both for the, for whatever the sponsor is doing, but also recognize as a separate entity a request that's really going to help with this sponsee. That's not every foundation, but it's most of them. And what we are doing just in terms of the work that funders have to do is on our websites and other materials to be really clear about that. So I know that in the case of the Onion Foundation, that doesn't matter to us if it happens to be a fiscal sponsor that we've already given money to, and they now want to have a funding for a fiscal sponsee. But that's something that we funders need to be very clear so that there's no confusion.
Well, I'm looking at the clock here and I'm seeing that we're at just about 1 o'clock. And so I think I'm going to move us towards close, but with a real appreciation again for the fact that this is a part of an ongoing conversation and certainly not a closed door to continued ideas and suggestions. And so to that end, I just wanted to know from, I'm not sure if this is a question for Carol and Joanne or for Diana, but if folks after this session, as they're reading the report and digesting, if they have follow-up thoughts or questions, or if folks who weren't able to attend live and are watching the recording, what is the best way for people to continue to stay connected with this conversation?
Thank you, Molly. I will offer that I would love to engage anyone in this conversation because I think it's both fascinating, but also essential to the future of our work together as communities, as nonprofits. So I would love to be part of that. Diana may have a bigger, broader game plan. So I'll happily plug into what you suggest, Diana, in that regard. But if folks just want to talk about the report itself, and I know Joanne always enjoys plugging in too. So just the report itself, don't hesitate to reach out. But also if you just like to scheme about the future, don't count me in on that too. So
yeah, I would say for ease, we could definitely say let's all use Carol for that.
Yep.
But I want to say that I know that all my fellow foundations that have supported this study are actually really eager to hear what you all think. I just happened to see a few of them recently, and they emphasize that. So we are really interested in your point of view, what you think are priorities, how you might think something should be done, etc. So please do share your opinions on that.
Well, thank you so much, Diana, for Onion Foundation's real spearheading this initiative. And I know you played a real role in gathering that cohort of funders that are supporting this and our peers in this effort. And to Carol and Joanne for this incredible piece of research and all the legwork and collaboration that went into that. As I said up top, I think it gives us such a valuable foundation of what's happening now and from which to have some really rich conversations about where we could go. And also just want to lift up, Melissa, the point you made of, and this is one piece of sort of a broader trend of really exploring what hub models and collaborations can look like as we think about effective collaborative capacity in Maine, and that there's really a lot of interesting work and how can we bring some of those conversations together into shared spaces to see where the intersections are. So thank you so much for everyone who spent their lunch hour with us today. As I mentioned in chat, we'll be in follow-up by the end of this week with the recording and links that were shared in chat or in the presentation, and contact information if you'd like to follow up with questions or reflections on the report itself. So thank you all again. I hope you have a good afternoon, and we really look forward to staying connected.
Thanks,
Take
everyone.
care.
Thank you, Molly. Thanks for having us.